Good morning, everybody. We're going to get the day started here with the next 3 days with Neoscape. This morning we've got Carlos and Rodrigo going to start us off. They're going to be running us through kind of at least to start the day, and most of the day today is going to be more of a high-level overview. And then in the last 2 days, we're going to really dig into some of the stuff they're talking about and talk about specific workflows and techniques and that sort of thing. But with that, I'll let Carlos and Rodrigo start this off, and maybe they can introduce themselves, kind of their roles at the company, and then also what they're going to be covering today. So with that, I'll hand that over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Make sure this thing is on. So my name is Rodrigo Lopez. I'm Chief Creative Officer here at Neoscape. And I think the goal for at least this initial session is just to give you guys some insight into kind of how we get projects going here. So we'll talk a little bit about internally what we do, and then also how we pitch creative to clients. And again, it's going to be very, very high level with some very specific examples, but hopefully there'll be enough variety there to give you guys a sense of how we approach it, and you'll quickly realize that it's often very different depending on who the client is, what kind of relationship we have with them, what kind of project it is. So that's what a lot of Carlos and I do here, and so I think I'll let you introduce yourself, Carlos, and we can get started.
So yeah, my name is Carlos Cristerna. I'm the Director of Visualization here at Neoscape. So yeah, we're going to start with what the chapter called here project initiation and treatment. That's, we have a listing here of things that we want to cover, but we don't necessarily need to follow strictly what I have here in that order, because it's all related, right? But we at least wanted to start with the different scenarios that we find ourselves, or the more general ones that we find ourselves in when we get a new project. And there's the typical animation that it's a competition, right? That there's a hard deadline, or there's some sort of like a major event that we need to work backwards and create a schedule for that. And there's also the ideal scenario when a client approaches us with the right amount of time and a good budget to create a film that we typically would want to produce in 10 to 12 weeks. So that would be an ideal scenario for a 2-minute animation that has a little bit of everything. It can take more, it can take less, depending on many things. So, there's a few things that we can show you, for example, that we create to share with clients, and that we internally have to go through. So, for example, quick schedule here for shooting. For example, we have to plan things. We have to, let me open 2 of these. The shoot, so it makes sense, and the actual film schedule. So there's a lot of planning that goes into these things, right? And we have to, as you see there at the very top on the left, we have to do interviews, get assets from clients, visit the architects or the parties involved. I mean, that's pretty straightforward stuff. We have to tell the clients when we plan on receiving all the final assets or not. Otherwise, the schedules can be compromised. Present the creative treatment, review the creative treatment with the client. And in this particular case, you see that there's a 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central AM, because we have clients, we have people all over the world, Australia, some places, different places in the US. Sometimes some of our colleagues were in Europe or other countries, Hawaii, throughout the whole process. So, it can be challenging. So first thing to do, I guess the point of this is need to plan for all that stuff. And and you can go through it, and then we can share some of these documents with you guys later so you guys can dissect them a little bit more. But that's kind of like
I think the most important thing about this is not necessarily what it says on the page. We spent the last 18 years selling our process. That's how we do what we do, and it's very much built around the way that we operate, and it's very customized to our production pipeline and the way that we manage projects. So I think that for us, it became very important many years ago when we started doing bigger projects with more clients to let them understand what goes into actually producing what we produce, and whether it's 3 renderings or it's a film or it's a whole suite of things, they need to understand what goes into it. Oftentimes our clients think that we go out, we shoot, we come back, we hit a button, and things magically appear. There's a lot of buy-in that that needs to go into the process, and a lot of client buy-in. So these schedules, and the first part of the project is always to establish these parameters so that they understand and they're educated. Oftentimes when we've done these with clients that we've worked with in the past, this is a lot less painless, a lot less painful. But oftentimes, and particularly with this project where it was with a client that we hadn't done a lot of work with in the past, and there were third parties involved around the world, there's a lot of management, and oftentimes people take for granted how long it's actually going to take to just manage a project. Forget about producing the artwork, it's managing and wrangling and all that stuff. So that's sort of the important thing to establish right out of the gate before you even start talking about any creative, any ideas, and pitching any concepts.
So yeah, it was, we had the first meeting we had with the client for this particular project, and you'll see the value in these documents further into the presentation. We're going to be showing actually things that we presented about these particular projects and things that we did for that particular project, right? For example, you see what is that Excel thing on the right? It was our plan for a 2-day, shoot with 3 people, helicopter, B-roll, you name it. So it was lots of logistics. We have we have project coordinators, which help us a lot with dealing with all these things. These 2 documents were actually created by the senior artist in charge of the project and the project coordinator. And we, like, going back to Rodrigo's point, first thing we meet with the client and we establish this and we tell them this is what we need to do, otherwise this is not going to work, right? It's not as simple as telling them that, but that's kind of like the core message that we want to send. And hopefully we can follow this process, and it could be less painful, like Rodrigo said, than playing it by ear or things like that. So this kind of like although this was an ideal scenario, this was a challenging project because of all the different people that were involved all over, around the world. So,
bottom line for you guys is, all of you here have your own workflow. You work in studios with other people. You work by yourself. Just understand that there's a value to that aspect of it. Your planning, your management. Ultimately, that should form part of what you guys are actually charging for. It's not just artwork. There's value inherent in you figuring out all of this for the client.
So there's also, after we establish these with the clients, and we have to get all the information we can get from them about the project, right? We have to learn what the project is. Is the project about what the real challenge for the client is? Is the project about creating buzz about the project? Is it about, is it to rent space? Is it to just reveal a project because it's already being built and, they want to do a big unveiling of it? Or is it an architectural competition, right? So obviously there's many more examples of that, of what what type of project it is, but it's a very important question to ask so you can start thinking of how you're going to approach it, right? So there's, let me show you I have 3 folders here with you can tell immediately the look and feel of an office space, right? It's just, it has a particular type of view, a particular type of lighting. These renderings in particular are, although they're office spaces, these were about the furniture. They were not selling the space itself, but the furniture. So, it's an example of how the cameras change, how the mood changes, and how the lighting changes just because it's a completely different product, right? So, important questions to ask for that. And then, last but not least, I have residential product in here. Again, different type of camera, different type of mood, different lighting, different scenario. So there's also, and that was just a quick example for renderings, obviously, but for a film, there's all these questions you need to ask, and then there's you need to learn: is it mixed, retail, residential, who the target market is, things like getting familiar with even the square footage they're trying to rent, the high level. You have to be part of their team basically and know exactly what they're trying to sell and how they're trying to sell it. Sometimes they don't know what they, how they need to sell what they're trying to sell. So it's very important that you dig very deep into what they think they know, so that you can actually propose as a creative person, this is what you need to do. This is your problem. Because sometimes, like in any aspect of life, if I have a problem, a personal problem, you're the last one to acknowledge that there is a problem, right? That people from the outside can start digging deep and see what's going on. So it's kind of like the same thing when analyzing a project and talking to a client. Sometimes a client is very knowledgeable, a very smart person, and a very they know what they want. So it's just simple things in there to keep in mind.
So think of it as a simple questionnaire that you'll develop depending on the way that you work, what exactly your client base is, and maybe it's different for different clients. A lot of times we work heavily with brokers who don't understand the last or first thing about what we do. But they need the stuff that we create. They need the visuals. That ultimately, any of them will tell you that's what's going to sell the project. So get in their head a little bit. Find out who it is that they're targeting. I mean, sometimes we ask how much they want to charge for rent, because that's going to drive how we finish and how we develop imagery. If they're charging, if they're trying to sell a $50 million penthouse, that's a very different proposition than trying to lease office space in a rehab warehouse building. So get in their head a little bit, and essentially, as you'll start to see, the question or the answers to those questions are going to inform how you pitch back to them what it is that you are proposing. And again, a lot of time we spend a lot of time thinking about like this, for example, right? It's like, this is who they're selling to, and so we want to understand who that persona is. Because ultimately what we produce is going to be put in front of their eyes. So think about that, because again, it's just like the process is important. Your thought, your thinking behind how you approach imagery, film, or both should be built around this. And this isn't about necessarily creating the artwork or artistic skill. It's about being a little bit of a shrink and trying to get into their head, so that when they ask questions or when they question things, you have an answer for them that's based on the information that they gave you. I mean, it's really that simple.
It also, it validates you as a professional, right? As an expert on what you're doing. If a client asks you a question about the project, and then you're like, let me check that document you sent me 2 weeks ago, and immediately the client's going to freak out. He's going to feel like you don't have the reins of what they're asking you to do, right? So it's extremely important that you become as knowledgeable as they are. So this is an example. What you're seeing on screen is an example of things that clients come with to us. They already are developing. There's projects that are very high end. They're already spending a lot of money on marketing, and they have professionals working on on the marketing side of it. They're developing brochures and stuff like that. And so we try to get as much of this information as possible, and we try to mine as much information as possible from these documents from, in this particular case. And again, with every document that you're going to see today, you're going to see something that relates to in the next 3 days. You're going to see this film and how this film, you can trace back the look and feel and everything to this particular document that the client was, very into. And it had very valuable information. It was already, well thought. Based on the target market, who, you're going to see the type of people they're trying to, that they're building this project for, but that doesn't mean that this is the people that are going to end up seeing these. It's aspirational, it's for retail, for retailers to get excited about the type of people that are going to be buying their stuff, right? So you have to make that differentiation. Is it really for the people that are going to use it, or is it for the people that are going to pay for the, or they're going to rent this space to sell to that people, to the ultimate user of the project. So it's, just something to keep in mind. We don't need to go. Yeah.
So I understand that in many cases, all of this research will be provided by the client, right? And is this something that you put together to validate that you understand and to share it with them, or you also participate in the research to gather that information?
This particular document is a document they sent us as you see it,
Okay.
right? But next, after we go through all that information, we create our own document that addresses what they ask us to create for them, right? And then obviously you need to get familiar with this. And we'll show you, we'll get to that. We'll show you the creative brief that we sent for this particular project, which is not 40 pages. It doesn't need to be 40 pages.
I think you should always make the distinction of, and we always do, we ask these questions of ourselves all the time. It's like, what's in our wheelhouse and what isn't? That market research is done by a person that's what they do. We do not do market research. We do not, do surveys and studies. I mean, there are marketing companies that's what they do. And in this case, that document was produced off of their research. What we'll do is we'll ingest that research and turn around something that is very much about the approach, the, sort of what we call the creative brief that we can go to the client. And a lot of that information is filtered in various ways. And some of it, like in the case of this project, some of it actually may end up making its way into imagery or film as messaging or motion graphics or things like that.
Yeah, even understanding the actual project. Right now, for example, in this particular one is, as you can see, it's a restaurant, right? And we have to have several conversations with the client to understand how this works. And again, when the time comes, you'll see the animation of this particular project, and all cameras, for example, were created based on the experience they wanted to put in front of their client. These were internal. These animations never made it public. They were for their own internal group. So little things like that.
Hi. Sorry, 3 questions in one. Maybe you already explained this, but we just got here. So, the first one is the research or this presentation. Do you put it together as part of a bid, or were you already invited to be part of the project? Then the second one is were you working directly with an agency on the creative side, with an advertising agency, or were you the production company for video, images, and also the creative? And like, I would like to understand really what was Neoscape role on the project.
So we've done a little bit of all of those things, and so we, for the past 3 years, have been a full service agency. So we'll basically act as the advertising agency that produces everything from for all the collateral, essentially. That last project that you were seeing floor plans for, that was us working with Hilton. Hilton's own internal team develops these concepts. These are restaurant concepts that they then pitch to operators. So people that will buy into that franchise to open up one of those restaurants in Singapore or in Miami. So we were working with their design team, who is very adept at developing these concepts. So they have a team of designers, experienced designers, architects that we work with, and they give us that information along with.
I'll open that back up because
Yeah.
it's very interesting. Everything you see in here, they created internally.
So this is a brand document that captures everything from the look and feel to the way that the menus are going to read, the packaging.
Yeah, even the renderings. So these renderings are pretty decent, right? And so getting these from the get-go is the perfect scenario, right? Because you like, oh, okay, you know what they like already, right? So it's like I said, it's the perfect scenario. But you always can make that scenario for yourself. You can make it if you just dig deep enough, right? I'm showing this because it's an easier document to just go through the information that's there, which should be the questions that you ask, regardless of whether there's a document or not, right? You have to know the history of the project. You have to know the location, transportation, how many people go there or don't go there. Is that the challenge? Things of that nature. And just to end your question, is all of the above, right? It depends on how the client comes. The client can come to you with like, I don't know what I need to do, and then you do the whole thing for them. Or like these two clients, we already have all this stuff that we worked on for 2 years, and then we work with their marketing department on that. So it's really how the client, it depends on the client and the type of project.
And I'll walk you through a document where we do some of this. It was to pitch a film concept on a project that we were actually the agency of record on. So we were hired to do the branding, the positioning, the Houston West film. So this project, this document here is simply the film treatment. But leading up to this, we had spent 2 months with a client establishing a brand. This was a huge project on the west side in New York City that they were, it was so big that they almost had a hard time figuring out how they were going to market it. And it was all about, and it was also going to be marketed to a wide array of people. So office tenants, all different types of office tenants, retailers. They wanted to use this as a catalyst for a new neighborhood in New York City. So there were a lot of things that went into this. So we spent 2 months developing a lot of imagery, mood boards, a lot of words and copy and messaging. And this was the end product of that, which was a film that they were going to be unveiling at a big event. And so we had talked to them about who their demographic was, who they were targeting, what exactly they were trying to sell and say about this project, and they really wanted to use this project as, like I said, a catalyst for a new neighborhood in New York City, which is a very ambitious type of undertaking. And there were all those factors, and then there was the fact that the team was comprised of 25 different people, all playing different roles. There were brokers and retail brokers and office brokers and marketing people and owners and other owners, and there were a lot of people with a lot of opinions. And a lot of what we had to do was not only to come up with an idea, but package the idea in a way that we could present it to them and give it to them so they could present it to other people. So we developed this little, basically a chapter book for this project, where we sort of establish, the goals for the film. So there's simple things like how long is it going to be, what's the working title, like what's the title of this thing, so that people can start talking about it in a specific way. What's it going to be about? In this case, we were basing it off this kind of fantasy.
So let me interrupt Rodrigo right there. You hear him say the goals, and the goals, after doing all this research, whether it's an animation, a rendering, a brochure, a website, whatever that you're selling to your client, the most important thing to establish after that is, what is this rendering for? The one rendering, I'm going to give the example of the rendering because it's simple and everyone can relate to that. Is the rendering supposed to show the couch? Is the rendering supposed to show the living room or the kitchen, right? There needs to be a hierarchy. Set the hierarchy, set the goals, and each thing can only have the one goal. There's no rendering that should show 3 things as important. There can be a hierarchy. There can be layers of information. And if the third layer, well, it's really not showing the kitchen, you go back to that document and say, it's not about the kitchen, remember. Oh, okay. If down the road they want to change that, okay, let's change the thing to the kitchen. Now it's about the kitchen. And then you have established the same goal, and you and the client are pointing in the exact same direction. So that's, to me, key, as well as gathering this information and tell the client in understanding when you approach them, okay, this is what I'm offering you we should do, and these are the goals. If they agree with the goals, then your first step forward, you're on the same page with your client. So that to me is very important.
And in this case, we wanted to take them out of their comfort zone. This was a group of people out of which maybe 10% were actually creative people that worked in marketing, and so we wanted to start talking about this in a very fantastical kind of way. So we were referencing, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and because that's sort of what we were basically regurgitating what they were saying to us. They wanted this to be unlike anything else in New York, and they were targeting all these different people. So we're putting it back to them in terms that they understand. They've seen that movie. They've seen both versions of that movie. And so, from there, it was about, okay, well, you're trying to market to all these people, right? So let's make people part of that story. Let's develop character types that are going to represent the different types of people, and then let's connect them with some sort of narrative. So we went through a pretty exhaustive exercise, out of which, okay, here's your office, your young professional that likes to run along the river, and this is how he's going to experience the project. Here is, the young professional female who works in fashion, because that's one of your targets. So there's families that are going to come here and are going to be entertained. So all of those things were captured here, and essentially, the goal here was to write a little storybook. And along the way, we put very crude storyboards, and this is just to get them kind of to buy into this idea. And so they could hand this to somebody else who may not have been part of the meetings, and they could sort of walk themselves through the story. Again, it's trying to position your creative work, your artistic work, in a different light, and to add value to it, to let them to make them stop thinking about it as like something they check off a list. Oh, I need a rendering of a hero rendering. Well, why do you need a hero rendering? Maybe you don't need a hero rendering. Maybe you need a lot of vignettes. And so that's the purpose of this. This document is obviously for a film. But to Carlos's point, it applies very much to stills as well. Yes.
So when this is happening on your project life, like is before you get the contract, is after you get, so you already have a budget?
Yeah, good question.
How does this thing
Good
work?
question.
Because I feel that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of time that you put on
absolutely.
this thing.
So
and
is that your only question?
Yeah, it's my only question.
So it's a very good question, and it's something that we struggle with all the time. Clients are going to want ideas for free. And so we have to be very careful about how much you give them before they actually sign anything, because these ideas are as valuable as the end product. And in some cases, they can take these ideas and shop them around. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? So we try to be very protective of our work. So there's not a lot of, we try to be very careful about spec creative that we put forward in, pre-sale documents. Sometimes there's things that we can tease clients with, but I think in general, this comes after a contract, after a discussion about how much budget there is. This is a huge budget film, and so we need to understand that money is even available. Otherwise, we can't develop an idea like this. And in some cases, a client may not know, and they may come to us and say, well, what's possible? Because maybe we'll find a budget. And then in that case, you tease them with ideas, but you don't go through this exercise of working out an entire story with characters. And at least that's not the way that we work. Some people do, but
we can show you the. Why don't you go ahead and open the City Point one? Because the City Point one is an example of the opposite, right? Of something that we already had done a couple of animations for the same client, and they were. they were, the first animations we did for them were very architectural. They were just about the project. They were just about almost a fly-through, right? They were, in our eyes, not very exciting, but they did the job, and they did the job so well that we've gotten many other projects because of that particular animation, right? Although in the artist's mind, we're like, oh no, I don't like to do those long cameras and you know, show the door and then the door opens and all that stuff, right? But there is value in all that stuff, right? There's value in all of those things that other people understand. So these particular animations were shown to the people that wanted to see that kind of stuff. CEOs that are not, you know, were not maybe the most tech-savvy people, right? And that they saw it and they were like, me, this is great. We literally got 2 or 3 phone calls from people from, you know, very high level people at different companies, and we want that. That is perfect. We love that. And so that was a huge lesson for us. And this client was very good with us. We had a great relationship with them, and we kept insisting on doing something cool for them. You know, this is Brooklyn. It needs to be cool. That document that I showed you originally has this very rich texture, graphics, and you know, it's Brooklyn. It's not. It's, you know, they're kind of trying to make it high end, but it's not, right? And so they allow us to make this other film, a second phase of the project, which was going to be shown at a different place to a different crowd. So it could be cool. It didn't need it to have a voiceover or anything like that. But the budget was considerably smaller than the project that Rodrigo was talking about. And this document, you know, shows that. But it doesn't mean that it needs to be, just because it's shorter or, you know, we spend less time on it, is less valuable. It's just you have to adapt to the circumstance and the budget and all that. So I'll just flip through it quickly. You know, we have a treatment. Instead of having a full storyboard, we at least have, you know, where you see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll go to the next page. 7, 8, 9. What looks like 9 shots, right? It's describing the way we want to go through the project and how we want to show it. And then on the right side, we have some of their imagery that already have designed, some of their iconography that already have designed, and then we just put together some graphics that represent the color, the style, and the kind of you know, mood that we wanted to make the film look like. So same thing there, you know, lots of overlays, lots of texture. The colors, the oranges and the blues were represented in here. And you know, we had some precedent imagery in there that imagery that we found, you know, we looked online, we looked for, you know, we did some research and just came up with this very simple document. And that's pretty much it. It's 1, 2, 3 pages of some, and the client loved this, the client saw this, and they were like, oh, this is great, let's do it. From there on, you know, it was very straightforward. But you definitely need to do this exercise regardless of your budget and regardless whether you're going to share these with your clients or not. Because this document was a document we gave to the production team. And again, you'll see the film maybe today, maybe tomorrow. And it's exactly like this, is the way, you know, this document says it. And there's no playing it by ear. You know, the client knows what they're getting, or at least have an idea of what they're getting. And the artists have a goal to, you know, at what to hit in terms of style.
Sorry, just to clarify, so this document was part of the bid or was created after the project was awarded?
This was created after the client told me how much money they had.
Okay. Like, huh. A couple of questions come to my mind that are the typical questions we have on our studio, and I imagine any other studio that are in the path of from starting from a production end or production house to a creative agency. Number one is these videos are expensive to produce. Sometimes clients don't really understand the cost and that they have behind and the entire production behind. And sometimes we've had opportunities where we have the budget, we produce them, we produce very high-end quality videos, but they are not well used. They are used only on sales centers and maybe their website, and that's about it. So I always think, and with the agencies that we work with, I always try to push to have a cohesive proposition between the piece itself and the way it is marketed. Like social media, a strong marketing social media campaign, and you in your position, I want to know if when you're proposing these amazing pieces of marketing, do you also contemplate how you're going to market and how you're going to have the awareness of all these different pieces, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, so part of the reason why we started to do more of the full service agency type of, will provide that type of service, is because we were very interested in how the collateral, the materials that we were producing were experienced. And ultimately, much like you, we felt that oftentimes clients were themselves devaluing what they paid a lot of money for by choosing to promote it in very strange ways or very traditional, limited ways, right? And so here you have, particularly with films, you have this rich medium. Everybody who is, everybody is bombarded with branded content these days, and so there's an expectation about how you experience a new product, a new brand. And so, to talk to an architect about, or a developer about thinking that way about their product, which is their building or their space or their project, is very much part of the conversation. That means we need to be aware of what other people are doing. How is Coca-Cola branding their soft drink, or how is Apple selling their iPhone? I mean, all of those things are things that we learn from, and then we can go back to a client and say, perhaps this film doesn't. We actually oftentimes want to use the film in a very limited capacity. Sometimes we produce films and people will devalue it by just blasting it out. And it's like, okay, well, maybe the film is the hook. Maybe the film is the maybe there's something else that you set the hook with, and you bring people to a marketing center, and that film is what you show them to really wow them. Maybe you shouldn't just blast it out and let everybody see it, because then they miss part of that story. Everything that we do is meant to be experienced and in some cases presented by people that are trying to sell something. Our stuff doesn't sell. As much as we like to think it, our stuff alone doesn't sell anything. It needs to be part of a presentation, a package. So I think that we sometimes, like I said, we try to get people to not just misuse a lot of these. So we're like, okay, well, let's do a little teaser of this film. Maybe we'll do it for free, so that you can maybe blast that out, or play it somewhere, and then people are going to be like, oh, what's that about? They're going to pick up a phone, or they're going to be driven to a marketing center, and then they get to experience the full thing. But you have them there. I mean, most of these transactions that we deal with, they're personal transactions. Like, there needs to be somebody who's trying to get you to sign a huge, $10 million lease for the next 10 years. So I think that it's a great question, and it's something that everybody here should be thinking of. It's like, my renderings, how are you going to use these renderings? Are they going to go on a brochure? Or a lot of our clients don't even know. They're like, I don't know. How should we use your renderings?
Yeah, to avoid that, back to your question, and it's perfect that you asked the question, because that's actually the next topic on the conversation is establish the end use of every single thing you do, right? And like Rodrigo said, clients sometimes don't even know how they're going to use things. So to avoid that, as part of your research and setting your goals, is how things are going to be used. How are they going to be presented? Who is going to see them? Are they going to be on an iPad? Are they going to be on a website? Are they going to be on, you name it, right? So I have here a few images of, websites, the renderings, all renderings you see in there. We obviously did we did the website for that particular project, and the branding, if I'm not mistaken. So is it going to be a sales center, right? Is it going to be playing on two screens? Is it going to be a touch screen? Is it going to be what is it going to be, right? Is it going to be just branding? and no renderings at all, right? We actually have to design this space so that they can market the actual space. And these people were like, well, we need renderings. No, you don't need renderings. You need this. You need to bring people to the space because the space is pretty cool. And so instead of doing renderings, we do this, what you see there. So it's our job to do that, to teach the client or to show the client that there are other possibilities to selling their product and analyzing what their challenge is.
And if you aspire to do that, to actually, we're always looking for ways, obviously, to upsell what we do and to add value, then you should be thinking about the experience, ultimately. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And so, everything that you do, the visual that you create is going to feel very different, whether you're looking at it on a little iPhone or iPad screen, or it's it's wallpaper in a marketing center. So think about it. And if you're interested in actually designing the experience, then think about that too. I mean, we started doing this simply by just coming with ideas to a client, and presenting them with like, okay, well, we're doing this rendering. Here's how we think you should use it, and in some cases they're like, nah, I'm not going to spend any money on that. But in a lot of cases, they see the value and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to spend this money on this rendering or this film. That's a really cool way to experience it. So I think, we try to think in that way. And some people may not be interested. They may be interested in the art itself. But I think any artist ultimately cares deeply about how people are going to experience, you should look at this rendering with the lights off and, and a big spotlight on it. I mean, those things should come to mind when you're producing.
And you need to be flexible also, right? Say, for example, this space in particular, if they didn't pay us to do any renderings, but you can do a very quick rendering of this to show your client that this is what they need to do, then you do the rendering, and then you don't charge them for that rendering, because the ultimate value of what you're selling them is not the rendering, it's not a piece of paper or a file, it's this. So
sorry, another question that comes to mind on that road from production to creative agencies, that sometimes when you think as the agency, when you think about the experience, but you come from a background of producing renderings, videos, you tend to rely always on those tools because you know them very well and you're comfortable. But sometimes even the creative or the research calls for other type of tools where you're not that capable. Like, how's your position on that? Or like, for example, I don't know, producing a large campaign on social media with a lot of PR that maybe you don't have the expertise. How I'm wondering how your position is on that.
You have to start somewhere, right? You have to ask yourself whether you actually want to do it or not. There's no voodoo on anything in life, right? And but there are experts at certain things, so you should definitely not play expert at everything. But I'll let Rodrigo, explain that in further, in much detail. But from my point of view, from the production standpoint, every time a client comes up with a challenge and it's a service we don't provide, we sit down and talk about it. Can we do this? We definitely know how to do it. Have we done it before? Was it successful or not? Was it a pain or not? Right? Is this client maybe a new client that we want to create a new relationship with? So you have to evaluate the whole thing and decide whether you dive headfirst on it or not.
Yeah, the question I always ask of myself and of us internally is, we need to know what we're good at and what we're not good at. That is crucially important. So to Carlos's point, we are always the first to try to look for new ways of doing something, whether it's technology or traditional, it doesn't matter, right? But then at some point, there's a client who's paying, who has expectations, and so you need to factor that in. And so on marketing centers, for example, marketing centers they're a big deal to us, because oftentimes they're very boring, they're very traditional. And so for this, we were pitching something that we hadn't done a lot of. We didn't call this a marketing center, we called it a gallery, right? So it's a building, it's a marketing gallery or a leasing gallery. So yes, we can imagine, a lot of us have architecture backgrounds, we love thinking spatially and we love thinking about interior design. But ultimately, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into this, like what materials are you using, what's possible, what's not possible. And so we brought somebody on board who that's what they do. They provide pricing. There's things that we never even contemplated about how much prep work needs to be done, and how many thousands of dollars need to be spent on things that you're never going to see. Architectural coordination. You know, we oftentimes, or actually not oftentimes, but recently, a lot of people are asking about technology, you know, virtual reality and, you know, experiential, like actually using technology to immerse people. We don't do that. I mean, we play with it, you know, we play with a Connect and we play with a Leap, but we are not going to be the company that you hire to put together a solution, manage it for you, make sure you're there when it breaks down. That's not what we do. So we bring somebody on board that we partner with, and we are not shy about telling the client, because the client is paying us to produce creative, to produce collateral. Somebody else can handle, you know, the servers that need to be installed and the technology and how to manage that. I think that we probably would do ourselves a disservice if we try to pitch our company as a jack of all trades, because I think particularly sophisticated clients will see right through you, and oftentimes you'll talk yourself off of a project by claiming that you can do everything. So I think clients appreciate when you know where to distinguish where your expertise ends and somebody else's begins, and you bring them on.
Also, you know, consider the fact that we started doing renderings. That's it, right? At some point, we had to do something for the first time, and that's what I meant by just you have to do it, right? If that's your ultimate goal, if you want to change your business to do that, then you're going to have to hire people that are experts at it, and you're going to have to get surrounded and, you know, with people that are experienced at that stuff. That's why we have now our interactive team, a graphic design team, a 3D team, a VFX team, a editing team, and I mean, you name it. It's people that are experienced at certain things that collaborate, and they, you know, there's people in the VFX team or the motion graphics team that also do 3D, but that's just because they're passionate about what we do and they like all aspects of it. But you just have to establish that you have to, if that is your goal, then do it, you know.
Just to close the loop on this, we sometimes get asked to coordinate events, right? We don't do that. That's like a whole other world and area of expertise that me personally, I want nothing to do with, because I know what a nightmare it can be. PR, we don't do PR. We have our own PR company, you know, so we have relationships that we build and we bring those people to the table. Copywriting, you know, all of us like to write, but
not me.
Ultimately, sometimes there are projects that require a copywriter, a professional copywriter. That's all they do, right? So I think it's knowing what you're really good at and where your value ends, because ultimately, yes, you might say to yourself, yes, I can write the script for this, but it's going to take you a long time, and that's time that you could be spending doing the things that you're really good at, right? So I think it's understanding, having a deep understanding of what you're good at and what you are not, and then developing relationships so that you can have people come in and help you out when you need it.
Yeah. Sorry, last question about this topic. Because we come from Latin America where, let's say, there's a virtue about being a jack of all trades. In fact, you have to be in order to survive. In North America, I've noticed by the last 13 years I've been living in Canada that the virtue is all about the specialization, right? How focused you are on one specific topic. And similar to you, we started producing renderings, then developing websites, then developing videos, photography. And at the same time, I realized that in order to bring those services to the table, it's not only a matter of bringing people that know or bringing different expertise, but making sure that that works as a business. And if you're into video, then you need to invest into good video editing suites, good motion graphic suites, compositing, and you need to become an expert, which by itself requires a good amount of investment, and it requires that you need to have at least a good amount of sales on that department. When so those are the kind of difficulties that I find, because of course for example in Toronto there are amazing shops that only do motion graphics or the most amazing 3D animation, and we don't want to compete with them, but at the same time we want to carry those services. I'm curious to know how you deal with these questions, or if you ever have those same kind of questions.
Yeah, I think I'll sort of say this again. You have to ask yourself. It's a difficult question to answer of yourself. It's what do you want to do, and that's what you should pitch yourself as. I personally don't believe that, and I think it's maybe a question of semantics, but being an expert at something is a tricky proposition. We ask ourselves this question all the time. We had to start asking it when we started doing other types of work. When we started doing websites, I mean, we want everything that we do to be of the highest quality possible, right? And so I know, because I know from my own, I have an architectural background. I grew up doing visualization. I know how much I love that craft. I'm not a web designer. I've designed websites. I think it's being knowledgeable enough about the possibilities, and then understanding also where your limitations end. And ultimately, that's a question that we've had to ask. We still ask it of ourselves every day. There's clients coming to us and they're like, "Oh, can you brand our company?" We could easily say, "Yeah, sure, we branded buildings. We can brand a company," but do we want to be doing that? And when you get into it, you understand that branding a company is very different than branding a building. So, we have to ask those questions of ourselves all the time, and we have to. It's hard to say no, because sometimes you get seduced by the possibilities. In those cases, to Carlos's point, we will spend the time trying to figure out, okay, what can we do, and then what can we bring to the table, meaning partnerships or other things to help us. In some cases, we might have to hide those partnerships from our end client, and not let them know that. That's tricky also, because you're having somebody else potentially do part of the work. And so I think ultimately what you need to ask yourselves is what do I want my studio to do, and how do I want to sell that to our client? And I understand, obviously, in different parts of the world there's different challenges. Here, we don't believe in specialists. We don't have lighting specialists. We don't have character animators. We just can't operate that way. Our business model, it's a business model that doesn't work for us. We want to be a creative agency that offers solutions, right? And offers solutions across a pretty wide array of media. So we don't get stuck in, technology or software or tools. We'll go out and buy a piece of software if we need to, because it's the piece of software that we need to do something specific, right? So I think it's, I can only answer that question from our perspective, but we are always having to ask ourselves that question. Is this something that we are really going to be, that we want to be doing, right? In the future, and is it something that we're really good at? If it's not, how do we want to position ourselves so that we can develop a relationship? And I think that it's tricky, right? It would be a lot easier, quite frankly, to just keep doing renderings, and so it becomes more complicated. But it's also a lot more exciting, because we don't want people to come to us because they want a film or a rendering or a walkthrough. We want people to come to us because they have a building or a project to sell, and we can come up with ideas for how to do that. So that's kind of our ultimate goal. And in some cases, there may not even be renderings involved. Yeah. Or a film.
And I can give you my personal experience, and I can relate to you. I've been living in the U.S. for 10 years now, but before that I was in Mexico, and I had my own business, right? My own business, meaning it was me and sometimes another guy, right? And I understand what you're saying, and you had to do all these things, or people tend to do in Latin America, as much as possible, because you want to have revenue, right? And sometimes a rendering is, not necessarily, valued as much as it is valued here. So, but I did make the decision of only doing one thing, and it's painful at the beginning, but it works. Ultimately, it pays off because you create product that is way beyond what the jack of all trades do. They dilute the product like you have no idea, and this happens in every Latin American country, where, oh yeah, I can do that, don't worry about it, I'll just call my buddy, and I'm not going to tell you that I called my buddy, and then I'm going to actually make money on it, and so on and so forth, right? That to me, I worked at several ad agencies and also freelancing for these ad agencies doing TV commercials and renderings for architects, and that to me was stealing people's money and devaluating your work. So again, ultimately it goes back to make a call. You want to do it, do it. You don't want to do it, don't do it. But if you focus on something, whatever that is, whether it's doing the one thing or the two things or the three things, if you do it right, you're gonna make money. Regardless of the country you're on. I know, you have to understand that it's an idealistic thing that I'm talking about right now, but it's ultimately a personal decision, a personal choice.
So I use the example of Peter Guthrie. You guys know Peter Guthrie. So he's I've met him a few times, and if you ask him about, he does great work, right? And everybody loves his work, and he's plastered all over the blogs, and he's growing his business, right? He started working in the UK and Sweden, in some remote part of the world, and he will tell you to this day that what he does is, architectural illustrations that are based very much on photography. So he's a digital photographer, right? And that's, this is a guy who has built a reputation, a brand for himself, and he is very, very confident of where his limitations start and end. He's like, I'm not going to do film work. He does a little bit of video work, but it's mostly just imagery. And it's a very specific type of imagery. And he's developed a clientele around it, right? And so some architects are not interested in that type of look. And but he has a very clear understanding of what he's really good at and what people value in his work. And he's like, now he's working all over the world. So that's a very specific example of somebody who has made a call. He could easily be, because he's been able to sit at the table, with the well-known architects, he could very easily start expanding, and maybe he will at some point, but he's very comfortable working by himself, and developing these beautiful works of art. So that's an example of somebody who is in our field doing what we do, who also has a very clear understanding of what he wants. And I think ultimately clients respect that. Clients respect us when we say, that's not what we do. We don't put together events. We don't deploy, $1 million worth of virtual reality experientials. We don't do it. We can talk about it, and we know enough about it to be dangerous, but we also know when to call in the pros. And that's really what it boils down to. So
next, after, I guess we kind of sidetracked a little bit, but we went through the whole initiation process of a project, right? We established, you meet a client and all that stuff. So it's time to make storyboards, right? And many of you ask, when do you do that? At the beginning, at the end? Is it high end or not, right? So I have 3 examples here. There are chicken scratch storyboards. Those are Rodrigo's drawings, just so you know. And then there's CG storyboards, and then there's hand-drawn storyboards. And by hand-drawn, I mean real storyboards.
Yeah, beautifully illustrated. Yeah.
By a real artist, right? So I'll just, and you can, I'll just go through them, and you just so that you understand. And it depends on the project, depends on the budget, but you always have to do it regardless. So we have here for Autodesk.
Yeah, this was interesting because, this is my artwork, so don't laugh.
Well, yes, laugh. The animation ultimately ends up looking exactly like this, and you'll see it at some point. And that's why it's important, and it's easy to laugh about it, because it doesn't matter how you draw. You just need to do it.
The key thing here was that I literally, or we literally had like 2 days to put storyboards together for this. This is a movie that we did for Autodesk. And it's a great team that we've had the pleasure of working with for many years. And so they understood kind of what our process was. They gave us a lot of that upfront documentation. And so this is literally just, I had an hour or an hour and a half to just crank out, 30 shots. And we had talked about the shots.
32.
32, yeah. I probably used a couple twice. So the point here was that, there was a client who we had a certain degree of buy-in. There was a storyline. There was a lot of documentation about what needed to be captured. And this was all about telling the story of Autodesk products, being used over the lifespan of a design or a product. So there was a very sort of specific end goal and a very specific forum within which those storyboards were going to be presented. And interestingly enough, the client looked through it and they're like, oh, I get it. There's a guy in a cafe, and then you're zooming in, and then he's in the cafe and he starts sketching, and then it becomes something else. So they got it, right? And so I think it's about understanding how far you need to go. We could have easily spent a week, and half the budget crafting out, really beautiful storyboards, but it just wasn't the time or the place. This other one was the same thing, and you'll see later that we oftentimes call upon an actual illustrator, like a guy who works on comic books, and he's amazing at capturing everything that you could possibly want to capture in an illustrative form. Characters and things like that, and he takes time and he's expensive, right? So there's a time and a place for that. This project that you're seeing here on the right is very much an architectural project, and so this was all about literally let's go back to architecture school and let's pull out some trace paper and sketch out this idea. It was a very simple film concept about a journey through time, down Park Avenue. So I think it's ultimately, these are very necessary, very much an important part of what we do, because we want the client to think about what they're agreeing to, ultimately. And then how cool you make them or how uncool you make them with that Autodesk one, ultimately is driven by how much time you have and how much do you think the client needs to see something that is, do you need to get the client excited? In this case, we needed to get the client excited about an idea. In the Autodesk case, we just needed to sort of confirm what they had almost given us already, right? So two very different type of propositions. And then in some cases, we need to call in, the pros here, because everything was hand-drawn, we pulled, and this building exists, we pulled in a lot of, reference imagery. And so it's, how do you package your creative in a way that's easy for a client to understand? And you have to know your client. We've tried templatized solutions in the past. We have to throw them out because some clients get it, some clients don't get it, some clients need something that's specially custom made for them.
I'll open a classic.
Oh God, this is back in the days when people were spending a lot of money on crazy things to sell real estate.
When we had like 6 months to do an animation.
Yeah. So this was a film that we did that all you need to know about the film is that the client agreed to have a 50-foot tall naked woman painted silver in the film, which
I'll get to it.
That doesn't happen anymore. So these are slightly more kind of artistic. There's a vibe to these storyboards. This is actually the work of that guy that I was mentioning. He's great with characters. This was a character-driven film. He draws action really well, and he really gives you a sense. He's a comic book artist, right? So he really gives you a sense of the sequence, the flow, camera angle. So a lot of what you see here is work that we sat down with him. We talked about these ideas. We didn't have a lot of preconceived notions about cameras, and so he himself figured out a lot of these cameras, and we ended up shooting almost exactly what he crafted for us. So that collaboration was pretty exciting.
So that's, again,
and we are not going to show this film.
The point, you can look at it online. The point being, that in a document like this one, you need to back up your ideas, your chicken scratch, with a little bit more, right? In the case of the real storyboards, It's almost not necessary, or not as necessary. You can still have it there, but the story is told in a much clearer way. There's already an intention for each shot. There's already a little bit of a mood to it that the client can relate to. So you notice that these two don't have any like precedent imagery or like mood board page at the beginning, like the City Point one and the other two storyboards. So a third example that I wanted to show you guys is the CG storyboard. And this, I have two of them. And I'll start with the easy one. It's a museum in Guatemala for the Mayan history, right? So we already had a very good 3D model at this point of the building. We were already doing renderings for it. And the client, these architects over under with these partners, there were a couple of other architectural firms involved, I don't remember their names right now, were super cool young guys willing to do whatever we wanted to do with both the renderings and the film. Unfortunately, the film has not moved forward, but it's a good example of what you can do once you have already your assets in there. And then it's not, I'm not as good at drawing like Rodrigo is, so this is the way I do them.
Wow, that's a low blow.
No, dude, come on. They're good drawings. So you have to, you do your research, your mood board inspiration, and very straightforward. You start, grabbing your basic model, V-Ray, sun and sky, some forest pack in there, and then start, putting some cameras together to explain the whole thing. A little brief explanation at the bottom, and that's pretty much it.
I always use the chapter, like the children's chapter book analogy. I mean, it's a perfect way to present, particularly if you're going to hand it off to somebody, to kind of walk them through. I mean, some people love the visuals, and ultimately the visuals are the thing that you're really selling. But a little bit of an explanation about, it could be goals, it could be an explanation of the movement or the activity that you hope to capture. I mean, it's trying to leave as little information unanswered for the client, but still not give away that sense of mystery, which in this case, it was about this beautiful building being carved out of the landscape.
Yeah, it was history. You can see the shot we see of every single Mayan ruin, where you see the jungle and the ruin just peeking out of the jungle, right? So it was basically that, and then we wanted to tell this is a history museum, right? So we wanted to tell the relationship of the architecture to that history. People were having a hard time. The challenge in this particular one was that people were having a hard time believing that this building actually looked or was rooted in Mayan culture. So that was the story we were trying to tell, and then ultimately it was based on the cenotes in all of the southern Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico and Central America, and the jungle itself, the stone that they were using, the patterns and the textures of the actual ruins, right? So it's a cool one. Another example we have, which is not an ArcViz film, and Rodrigo might want to talk more about this guy, but it's another storyboard that was made for different purposes.
Yeah, so this was a very different, not architectural at all, although it started out as an architectural visualization project, and we quickly steer the client away from it because it wasn't about architecture. So EMC came to us because they were building this they had actually just built this new data center, and if you guys know data centers, they're the ugliest things in the world, like from the outside, right? They're typically like Costco-looking warehouses, and then inside there's this beautiful thing that has a lot of data and a lot of expensive equipment in it. They wanted us to produce a tour that basically showed people how they were using that facility, and part of that was to sell this idea of EMC's mission statement, which is to sort of make the life of IT professionals easier. and they've sort of developed multi-billion-dollar business around this really quite simple idea of we're decluttering the environment, and it's all about the cloud and things of that nature. So in this case, we're like, okay, well, we can tell the story of your mission, and we can use that as a way to lead people. This was ultimately an interactive tool that we were building for them that had a lot of animation and a lot of process animation and things like that. EMC, huge corporation, they have strict brand guidelines and colors and how things need to look, and a lot of this was based on that language. Very simple graphics, vector art, and so we took this idea and created a little 30-second trailer essentially for this interactive that was meant to sell the value of EMC. And so people would watch this, and it has some of the messaging that they had used in advertising campaigns. And essentially here the story was not architectural, but not that dissimilar. There were goals in place, and it was us trying to steer them away from their preconceived notions of what they needed, when in fact what they needed to sell was why EMC is good at what they do and what kind of value they can bring to your business. And then, part of that was also telling the story of this data center that was not great looking, but had a lot of cool stuff going on inside of it in a non-photorealistic way. So this was created much like we would, this is basically the equivalent of my chicken scratch, with one of our artists here who ultimately ended up working on this, putting together this mood boards that would walk somebody through the sequence. So ultimately, it adds that this type of work has value, whether you're doing something really simple, really complicated, and in some cases you may find yourself, not doing something that's completely architectural. And how do you leverage that, those tools in those scenarios? Before
you asked the question, because I wanted to, point this back to one of your previous questions. This is a very good example of when a client comes and asks you to do something, and then you tell them, no, this is what you need to do, right? And this is a good example where we sat down and said, yeah, that's not going to work. Why don't we do this, something that we've never really done, but we knew that we could do, right? Because this was ultimately made in 3D, in motion graphics, and the creative side of it, and then we, started turning the whole thing around, and then we ended up doing a lot of stuff for this client, not just the one rendering of the warehouse, of the new warehouse, with the computers inside of it. Yes, Jeff.
As part of a video, the visuals and the story is as important as the music and voiceovers. At what point do you start thinking about music, editing, and the actual script or the copywriting for the voiceovers?
Immediately. We're going to be talking about this with our editor, our lead editor here, and I are going to be talking about that, how important. And unfortunately, it's going to come later on in the process, but we're going to actually talk about how a lot of that thinking needs to go into, even as we're writing storyboards. I mean, a lot of times we'll do mood edits with storyboards to get people in the mood for, to address the vibe of something. So it's crucial. We know how crucial it is, and we try to get people thinking about it right away. Voiceovers are tricky because I think a lot of times clients there will be a requirement for it or whatever. And
here's an example of not doing everything we just told you to do and go straight to a mood edit.
Right.
So for this particular project here in Boston, we had this idea. The client came to us and they wanted an ArcViz film of that project. They were like, no, let's do a little bit more, something a little bit more interesting where this project is particularly located in Boston, in between the suburbs and the city, right? So that was kind of like their selling point. And there's the younger guy is gonna come and work live in the city and commute from the city to this place. And then his boss or like the older guys with families and stuff like that will come from the suburbs to this place, right? That was our selling point. So we had to tell a story of connectivity, of how we get from these 2 points to this place and how this is so convenient, right? So we came up with a very simple concept in which these two people come here and they literally, they were supposed to meet and, we're like, well, that's so cliche. That happens all the times in the ArcViz, animations. Let's make them not meet at all. And that's the end of it, right? So they were basically, talking to each other about meeting, but then they had to cancel their meeting because the one guy was having too much fun, or the other guy was just going to have some drinks, or their meetings went for a long time. So we're just using these two characters to show the different things that people can do, the two different types of people and the two different things that they could do in a split screen, right? So that became a little bit too complicated to storyboard with chicken scratch. So there was no budget for artists to do a fancy storyboard. So what do? We do this. We do what we know how to do. We sat down and our editor said, you know what, let's just do this. I can grab all the iStock stuff I can find and I can make this movie right now. And that's what we did. The client saw this, back to the music. That's the music that we end up using in the film, in the final one. And so at some point in the next 3 days, you'll see the edit of that particular film, and it's the exact same thing. And the client, was pretty happy with it. So you just have to, kind of play that kind of stuff by ear, know what your strengths are, and then just use them.
And sometimes you have to think about what is possible in that particular moment. There are times when we're super busy and maybe we can't storyboard because the people that typically do that are not available, right? And so we have to come up with alternative solutions. Or in this case, we had been doing work on the renderings and we sort of knew what the look and feel with those were going to be, and you saw some of those. There's actually, I think, only like 2 or 3 shots of actual viz in that edit. But it's about sort of understanding at that given moment. I mean, we have to make those tactical decisions every day, and ultimately it was going to be easier for our editor to sort of kill 2 birds with 1 stone right off the bat. Let's skip storyboarding altogether. Here we have a client. We've talked about their story already. We don't really have to sell them the story, but let's package it in a way that is a little bit different. And at that given moment, it may have been that our editor was actually available to do that, and whereas another artist wasn't. So have to be able to think on your feet. But back to your point, editing style, the mood of the piece, the vibe, it's crucially important. And what I was saying about voiceovers real quick is that oftentimes people think that a voiceover will help fill in the gap, right? And I think that unless a voiceover is really well done and really well thought out, sometimes it can be distracting. It's like you're almost narrating verbatim what you're seeing on the screen, and it's like, wow, why does somebody need to tell it to me, right? So we always like to think of our films as, as often as possible, having a little sense of mystery, leaving some questions unanswered, and I think that voiceover narrations, although sometimes necessary for whatever reason, sometimes are our clients' way of saying that they want to talk about certain things, but they're not necessarily sure how they're going to do it. And so we'll question voiceovers a lot because it's a lot of work to do them well, and oftentimes they can end up taking people out of that moment where you want them to feel something. Or
many times, people think, us and clients included, that it's an easy thing to do, a voiceover, for example. Just recently, someone decided that we could write a voiceover, right? And by we, I mean the client and us together, right? And then, okay, go ahead and do it. They do it. We record it. and then they see it in the film, and they're like, long story short, take it out. And it's a complicated stuff. It's not like you can just start typing and that's the end. So again, establish what you want to do, set your goals, and try to do it right. Otherwise, call someone who knows how to do that stuff, because you're gonna devaluate your work, and that's really it. So just to wrap up this part and get into we're gonna get into the pre-visualization, the previs of the whole project, and we're gonna have a couple of our we're gonna have our technical director Matt Richardson and Vinny walk you guys through some of the now starting to do the project, a little bit more less talk and more show. So hopefully you guys will be less bored. And but the last thing is the storyboards. Just to finish, it's important, just as we did for that film, that proof of concept film that I showed you just a minute ago, and all the storyboards that we saw. 3 points. We're establishing composition of the film, wide shots, close-ups, medium shots, whatever you want to call them. You're delineating the key spaces that are going to be shown, and the key scenes and the action for the client to understand. And the orientation of the project is very important. How do you create your cameras? And Matt and Vinny are going to talk about that, and how they should move. Should they push? Should they pull? Should they pan? Should they tilt? Should they move up or not? And this is also based on is it retail? Is it residential? Is it exciting or not? Is it supposed to be? You name it. So we'll get through that. So just those things to keep in mind when you make your storyboards, and not just start drawing chicken scratch.
And then just in closing, you should always be thinking about how, like the storyboard or your concept art for an illustration, like that piece or that deliverable, think of it as an actual deliverable, right? So how is that storyboard going to be presented, and how are people meant to experience it? Are you gonna sit in front of somebody and narrate it to them? I mean, I think it's important to think about all those things, because again, we always think about where are we adding value. Like our client needs to understand that they're hiring us to put together these stories, and they can be really exciting, and a client can be a part of it. And ultimately, that's what it's all about, to get somebody or a group of people excited about what it is that you're about to embark on. That's as important as, is that the right toilet fixture? It's like a lot of those things are really, at the end of the day, not that important. It's important to really capture something. So I think as we're going through this, just understand that aspect and that part of your work is as important as the end product.
And that is it for us for today.
All right, so our next speaker is Matt. He's going to be talking about the previs side of things at Neoscape. So Matt, I'll hand that over to you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff. Morning, everyone. My name is Matt. I'm on the kind of the 3D and film teams here. Do a little of both on my day-to-day, but today I'm going to talk about previs, which is kind of the next stage in the pre-production process that we go through. Similar to what Rodrigo and Carlos talked about, we don't use this for every project, and sometimes more than others, but I'll kind of show you some typical uses that we have here for pre-visualization. So just to get a sense, who here uses any previs techniques in any of their work currently? Couple. So hopefully the takeaway here will be to maybe reinforce some of the things you might already know, but then maybe give a couple tips and tricks on stuff that we use it for. So I just put this quote here on the front slide: all great photography is about communicating an emotion. That was more about photography, but I feel like that is a theme that maybe we keep in mind, but also our philosophy here. We do produce renderings and films and supply those to the client as a service, but ultimately it's about communication and getting their message out to some other audience. So whatever medium we use, it's still about communication. So you'll kind of see that theme throughout this presentation, and then probably a lot of the other things the next few days. So what is previs? This is a definition I found from the Pre-Visualization Society, and the main takeaway that I highlighted here is to visually explore creative ideas, plan technical solutions, and communicate a shared vision for efficient production. As I go to the next slides, you'll see I broke this up into the three main areas that I feel like it accomplishes and you're able to do with it. So the first thing is communication. And, you know, whatever production tasks you might have day to day, I feel like whether you're supervisor or part of a team, the most important thing you do is communicating with others. And, you know, you can communicate with words, but images are so much more powerful. And the previs phase helps to put this in a visual medium that you can convey to others. So it's a collaborative effort and very visual effort to make sure everyone is on the same page before moving forward with production. One thing it can help do is, you know, if you're hiring actors or using actors, it's to help them imagine what it will be like when they're on set. And ultimately, the main takeaway is that everyone in production is in agreement that what is depicted in the previous stage is ultimately achievable, and they're on board with producing that. So there's a balance. You're certainly able to get an emotional side from the previous assets, but you need to balance that with the practical and technical side and ask, can this be done? Because you can visualize a lot of cool sequences and shots and different things like that, but ultimately if you can't achieve it, then it's not really worthwhile to even go through that. So as a director, you might see what the limitations are, and ultimately you need whatever you produce, you need to edit together and make sure it works in a creative fashion, or you know it's cohesive and makes sense. It also allows you to experiment and play around with things. You may be able to make a lot of versions or iterations quickly and cheaply in a rough format, but still get a sense of what the end product will look like, rather than waiting until you're on location or on set, or burning production cycles later on in the process and then realize that things aren't going to work out. You can make things like camera variations or slight timing changes to animations quickly at the previs stage before you really get going. So some of the things that we use it for here, a lot of those theories are common in traditional film and photography, but some of the more specialized things that we might use it for, we do a lot of helicopter shoots for aerial photography in our films. So using things like Google Earth and other map data to visualize the site, figuring out things like the height of the helicopter, what time of day to shoot, things like that is essential to plan ahead of time. We use the biped or cat or other character tools in 3ds Max and other software to set up rough character action that you can, it doesn't need to be perfect by any means. It's not going to be in the final project. And sometimes we don't even show the client this. It's more internally to make sure we're on the same page with what we're going to either film on the green screen or in live action, or if we have a more custom animation that we need to do in 3D, even to rough it out to make sure that the sequence works. So getting some rough animations out to the editor and then putting a sequence together, make sure it works, and then we can move forward with refining it. We also can experiment with different lighting and camera settings, so using tools in V-Ray and Max to change time of day quickly and dial in camera exposure settings ahead of time helps a lot. What your real camera needs to be set at when you get on site for shooting different things. So the first thing we'll dive into a little more is with the bipeds to block out action. And I will open up a couple examples here. A little louder. So this is one project that Carlos and Rodrigo referenced earlier in an initial creative document that we got from the client. This is one of the restaurant concepts. So after getting that initial document from the client, we'll take that and craft our story. So I'm just going to show you a snippet of the first film delivery we did to the client, and then I'll show you the same snippet from the final, and then have a side-by-side comparison just to show you how we used the previs to block out some of the character actions. So here's our animatic. So you'll see like the rendering quality is very basic, no texture. Sometimes the character doesn't even need to be moving, just posed to get a sense of what's going on, and then with some on-screen text, you can further explain what's going to happen. So I'm going to stop it there. I don't need to go through the whole thing. But if I bring up the final here, so before I go too much further, let me bring up, I put together a little side-by-side comparison to show you kind of shot by shot where the two edits went, and almost perfectly shot to shot, we kind of stuck with those same positions and actions, and even down to the camera angles that we set up in the initial animatic phase carried through and into the final film. So for a film like this, where the character action is kind of important in driving much of the story, it was really important to nail that in the previous phase, show what those actions would be. One, for filming what we needed to get on the green screen so we weren't wasting time there, but then also to show this to the client ahead of time and get them to buy in. Because ultimately, if they're not on board with it or don't agree, then it doesn't make sense to actually film the characters and put them in there. So, they could see this edit up front and say, yeah, that's what we want to do. So then, it was a great roadmap that we could just follow throughout the rest of the process.
Sorry, for this type of video, what type of time frame do you have from beginning to end? And for the casting, do you do also the casting of all the different roles, or just of the principal roles, or do you always have like different actors that you rely on your videos?
So that's a great question. I'll answer the second part first. So. Most of our actors that we hire are actually employees here. All the people in this film are employees on the other side of the wall there. So we don't really have to hire them, and more just get them to agree to help us out. And you'll probably see some of the same people throughout the other videos too. That's not to say we don't ever hire actors. For something like this, the budget was lower, that we didn't have the money to go out and hire real talent, but it's not to say that they didn't do the job here. It's an effective way, maybe just as well as if we hired kind of professional actors. So, and then going back to the first question, these kind of movies, we've done several of these kind of restaurant concept films, and then a movie of this kind of scope is about a minute long animation, and I think we did say 8 weeks from getting the initial creative brief from the client, the one that Carlos and Rodrigo showed with the kind of the top-down plans of the restaurant and that precedent imagery. So from when we get that, we kind of craft the story, build whatever 3D assets we need, and then from there have a, every kind of 2-week review process until the final. So I think for this, we did four versions. We did an animatic, a rough cut, a fine cut, and a final. And I think it was about 2 months from start to finish.
Okay, here we are.
Thanks. How much does lighting play in the previs? It looked like the lighting was setting the mood to some degree.
Right. So about lighting, that's a great point too. This is actually a second example of another restaurant concept, and I'm not going to play through the whole thing, but I'm just going to scrub through. We tried to develop the lighting, at least in a preliminary stage, to show different times of day. So the first sequence was meant to be earlier in the day, breakfast time, so some warmer colors and tones. Even on a white override on the scene, you still get a sense of that lighting. And then as it transitions into the later half of the film, it gets into the more blues and purples just to convey a nighttime feel and some evening activity. So, I mean, this is very rough, but even just the two overall colors, but there is even some kind of more focused lighting kind of here and there. Obviously, this would be refined later on, but I mean, in certain cases, it is helpful to have that up front, if we do want to play with the different times of day or different types of activity that may be happening throughout the day. Obviously, not all projects would need the lighting in the previous stage, but it's definitely something we experiment with. So let me show one other example of this same idea. This is for actually the chicken scratch storyboards that the guys presented a little while ago for that Autodesk film. This is the side-by-side comparison from the animatic phase with the previous character to the final. So if you can think back to some of those drawings, I can bring those up after just to compare, but you'll see that the shots are pretty much one for one with what was in those storyboards. So just to circle back, I'll open up those storyboards real quick. Again, so you're just following through the shots pretty much match up. So, when Rodrigo made these storyboards, I took those and created the rough cameras with our preliminary model and just blocked in the character action. Even though the character wasn't really moving in any of those, you still get an idea of what they'll be doing. So, if the storyboards or whatever creative treatment is established up front and it's kind of agreed upon, you can kind of follow that throughout the whole production.
Do you have a model just for the animatic or just overlapping phases? You do a model specific for the animatic for your pre-visualization, or they just build at the same time, like the final model and the animatic? How does it work?
So in this case, some of the assets we used in animatic were models we already had used in previous versions or other films. We'll kind of piece it together with whatever we have available. So we knew that this was kind of the shell of the space that we wanted, and then kind of put in some placeholder set dressing and furniture and things like that we knew we could refine later on. But in this case, we had some assets ahead of time, which was further along. But many times we won't have this type of information to start with, so we may need to rough in some general shapes. Maybe not even half as much detail as in here, but even with some boxes and general forms, you can get a pretty good sense of scale and pacing and things like that. So it kind of depends, but this one is an example of a little more detail up front that we had to work with. So getting back to some other uses, the aerial photography is a big thing that we do, and as if any of you have hired a helicopter pilot or gone up to film, it can be very expensive. It is very expensive. So having a very concise plan, know exactly what you want to shoot. It's tough to get up there and say, oh, well, let's just fly around and shoot this and get that. You really need to map out those flight paths and know the right time of day to shoot, because usually you only have an hour window or so to get those shots. So using different tools like Google Earth, and there's some other sites that I'll show you in a minute, you can, depending on the level of detail you need to produce or the information you want to convey to either the DP or the pilot, you can take that further. Let me just open up a couple examples here. So this is a project in Texas that we've been working on for a couple versions the past few years. So this was a new sequence that they wanted to add in, and we were trying to determine if we needed to get a new helicopter shot, because we had done an extensive shoot a few years ago and gotten several shots, but there was just this one more shot that we needed. So with the assets we had, we tried to mock it up all in CG to see where it was. So this is kind of our previs, but it was a lot further along than some of the other ones, in the hopes that maybe this could be used in the final movie with some modifications. But after seeing this, everything kind of in the midground and foreground was great, but in the background we didn't have the information that we need from a video backplate. So this ended up being used as the previs for the helicopter shoot that we needed to conduct. And even though it was only one shot that we needed, having an exact plan on what to get meant that they could just go up, get the one shot without wasting too much time. So after this, we experimented a little bit with the lighting, just to see, okay, so since we are going to go up and get the actual shot, we might as well see what time of day we'd want to get that. So with just some basic override material on the model, we could try out different times of day and see what worked best. I think ultimately we decided on something earlier in the day. This was kind of the main area that they wanted to focus on, so with the light coming kind of from the left and illuminating this area, we felt like that was best. So I can show you the actual footage we got from them. First let me show you. So in addition to this clip and some of the lighting studies, just to confirm the location in Google Earth, this is the site. This was the lake in the foreground, and then this is the empty site. So it was these buildings in the background that they wanted to feature, which we didn't have in our model. And we could have built them in 3D, but ultimately to get that context right, we felt like it was just better to get the actual shot. So we just did a couple screen grabs here in Google Earth to confirm that this is the right angle. And there are some good tools in Google Earth. You can get things like the the altitude and the elevation, which are at the bottom. So we knew that, you know, the elevation of the site was, you know, 130 feet above sea level, and then the altitude of your eye right here was at 570 feet. So that's roughly 440 feet off the ground. So we knew rough measurements on what to give the helicopter pilot to get a similar angle to what we wanted. And just to make sure we were all on the same page, we did a top-down plan. This was the area that we were looking to get in focus. You know, gave some rough measurements for the pilot, some lens information that we experimented with too, and then just a general kind of arc that we wanted the helicopter to fly in. So after going through all of those steps, this was the footage we got back from them. Obviously, it's a little shaky. The color is not great yet, but it was enough to work with. Also, if you noticed, it's the opposite direction of what we marked up in the map. So in the final, which I'll show you now, we did have to reverse it. But besides the few cars on the right here, that would give it away, which I think we ended up covering up anyway. There wasn't really anything else in the shot that would give it away that if we did reverse it. So that wasn't a huge deal. So this was the final clip with some other animation and motion graphics. After some stabilization and color correction, and reversed it. So we covered the old cars and put in our own 3D cars to be going in the right direction. So I just open up, oh, I closed it. So the original clip, that, you know, it's not that far off, but especially in the background, you get that context of what was important to them to see the connection with the rest of the development. So this is an example where we, you know, the previs wasn't necessarily planned out at the beginning as such, but it ended up being very helpful to get the final shot. Just a couple other examples on that heli planning. These were some storyboards we did. This is Philadelphia off in the distance, and this is the area near the river here that we were doing a site near the baseball and football stadium for a casino project. So we didn't go through any moving cameras for this, but we went through Google Earth and took some screen grabs and marked them up with some descriptions here. And kind of what, this is the site right here in green, kind of what we wanted to capture. And we did share these with the client just so they could see the sequence, but Carlos was actually the one who went down and got these shots. So it was more, as long as we were comfortable with the information internally, they did the trick because he was the one that was going to be filming it. So, you know, and this was a super short timeline, and we needed to get it, you know, basically on the one day we had the chance to get it. So we really needed to plan out and really frame up the site and what we wanted to get and achieve. So. And then one other example of that, similar idea. Also, a colleague who went to New York and got these shots. You know, New York City with our site in the background, and you know, this was another example of using Google Earth to just take some screen grabs, mark up where the site is, some direction for the camera, and get everyone to be in agreement. I have a question in the back.
Do you have any preference on the type of HD camera or lenses? And like when you say that you try out different lenses on the 3D model, is that related to a DSLR camera or like a Red or a Phantom? Or?
So that's a great question, and something that some of the other sections later today, and I believe later today, some of the other guys will cover that in more detail, but just to give you a little sense, we've been shooting more with the Red. There's some folks that we have connections with that have that equipment, so we also have a Red here that we can, kind of try out the same settings in. We also use Cineflex, which has been what we've used mostly for a lot of these shots. But if you wait for the other folks later on the day, they can definitely dive into more information on that. But there are one or two main rigs that we work with the helicopter teams, so we're able to at least know what equipment is available and then translate that to some of the previs work we do in Max and create similar cameras and at least what the camera is capable of shooting and doing. So just a couple more. Yeah, so just Google Earth. I don't know if people have used it for just exploring or for previs, but it is a great tool to get every day there's more 3D buildings in there. You get a sense of the terrain, how the site could work out. You can take measurements in plan view just to see distances, and like I showed previously, the altitude and the elevation, just to give you a general sense of where you would be. In conjunction with the Google Earth, this is a site that I've definitely leveraged from time to time, and I'll show you a quick example. So it's real-world vector map data that you can download and work with to build out rough sites or create, at least use as a starting point for map creation. It wasn't that intuitive to kind of figure out how to save a sample map and then actually make a 3D site out of it. So I'll try to break it down a little bit right now, just to show you a quick workflow that I've has been successful here. So have the website here. It's just openstreetmap.org. I'll zoom in on us here in Boston. So it is a little heavy because all of this vector data is live. So as you zoom in, you can see how detailed it is. I mean, there is a text layer with street names and other landmarks. You'll notice the colors kind of match what you think. Like obviously the blues are the water, the greens are the parks. You have the building pads, and you can even get street information, sidewalks. So it's not everything, but it's definitely a good starting point. So say we wanted to visualize the site where we are right now. So we're in this building right here on Dry Dock Ave. So how do you save out that vector data? So there's some tools on the right here, and one of them is this share. And you can specify a file format. Obviously, the PNG and JPEG aren't going to work because those aren't vector formats, but in the PDF, it will save that vector information. So you can either do the current screen grab or set a custom dimension. So if we just wanted basically our building and the surrounding site, you could do that and say download. And it's going to save that PDF. And then from there, you can view it just in a PDF reader. Let's see. So this is in PDF. kind of the text is still live and everything, but from here, you still need to process it a little bit. So if you open it up in Illustrator, let's see, where did it go? Yeah. So in Illustrator, you'll see that you have access to all the shapes and everything. Unfortunately, it's not totally organized to start with. It dumps it all on one layer, but you can go through and do things like select one object and then do same, say, fill and stroke, and then it will select all the pieces that have that same shape. So this was all the building pads, and then you put those on a new layer and then quickly organize it like that. And then from there, I don't know if anyone's imported vector data from Illustrator into 3D Max, but if you save out the file as Illustrator file, but you need to change it to the oldest version, Illustrator 3, is the only version that will import into 3ds Max. So if you save it as that, still an AI file, but you can import it directly into Max and then have all the splines to work with. So I won't go through the process any further, but at least give you a general sense of how to get started if you did ever want to use this for your own projects. I don't think we've taken this all the way throughout the end of a project, but when Google Earth imagery wasn't enough to previs something, we could bring in the vector map data, extrude some shapes, build a quick site, and then move some cameras around there just to get a general sense of what we wanted to do in the end. So just quickly going back to one of the other uses, cameras and lighting. Touched on it with the green screen shooting for the people and the different camera movements, but also lens information, and then with the lighting, getting the right time of day for aerial shots or even just backplate shoots, whether it's a photo sim that we're putting 3D on top of, or if it's just a photo backplate out of a set of windows, whether it's in an office or a residential. You still kind of want to get the right time of day, so having your 3D model and using a real-world lighting setup. I'm sure most of you have used the daylight system in Max, but just to quickly show you what that looks like. You can create this daylight system that has real-world data, so you can get your location, real-world location, set your time of day, date. If your site wasn't with north up in the plan view, you could rotate the compass so that it rotates the system to match your model rather than having to rotate your model to match the compass. And then you can just toggle through the time of day and set up some quick lighting. That's what we did for that aerial shoot in Texas, where we tried to move the sun to see what time of day we wanted to shoot. And that's about it. Here's just a few references and other links that feel free to check out. So this Pre-Visualization Society is it's a nonprofit group that is made up of industry professionals, filmmakers, photographers, architects, that they kind of just got together and put this team together to kind of as a knowledge base and set some standards, but also to just get the word out there that the previs phase is kind of a real thing, and it has its place in production. They made a short documentary series, some clips on Vimeo. I think Autodesk was a sponsor for that. So there's some good stuff in there, and they have some well-known directors and professionals that speak on that. And then I don't know if you've heard or checked out any of Ron Bigelow photography. He has some good tutorials, but also some philosophy on shooting, photography, and planning. And he does talk about previs for photography specifically. And then third floor is a production group that specializes in previs. So that's all they do. They are hired by some of the big studios and for commercials and film to do just the previs on. So any other questions?
All right, then. Thank you very much, Matt. So our next section here is going to be on the animatic edit. That's with Dave and Vasily. So we're just going to take a couple-minute break. If everybody can stay seated, unless you need to make a quick rest break, so we can get the transition done quickly. We've got quite a few transitions today, so I want to try to keep everything on track. So we're not here till 10 o'clock at night, because that could happen. For everybody online, we're just going to quickly mute everything, and we'll be back on in just a couple minutes. Okay, we're ready to get going here. So the next section is on animatic edits with Dave and Vasily. So I'll pass it over to you guys to go.
All right, how are we all doing today? We are here to talk about the animatic edit phase of production. My name is Dave Parmenter. I am technically the senior motion graphics artist, but I also do a lot of coordination of the film team's responsibilities. So I'm usually involved in most films here. And
I'm Vasily Shields, and I'm the senior editor, so I pretty much touch most of the animatics and the edits that we do.
Right. So we're going to talk today about one of the first things that ends up happening once we've gotten elements that are coming in from guys like Matt, who just gave you his talk about getting all of the assets together, the CG assets. Because the animatics, in many ways, they're a proof of concept. We need to make sure that we get everything strung into a timeline so that it makes sense and that the vibe and the general mood of the piece is going to work and make sense for the end goals that we're going for our clients.
Yeah, often we don't have all the assets, obviously, when we're starting an animatic, but we just have to do our best to represent what the final film is going to look like. It saves a lot of time in the end if we work together at the beginning to make something that both internally and with the client, everyone's happy.
Right. So we can show you an example of an animatic we did for the Safdie Astana project. And here we go.
that was actually a pretty good looking animatic. They don't always look like that. And remember how finished that look. But next we can show you what the final version looks like so that you can really compare and see just how far we got with the animatic and how that saved a lot of time, you know, going back and forth with CG cameras to get the final look.
I'm going to show this one not at a full screen, just because we saw a little bit of sort of problems with the playback. This might maybe be a little bit smoother.
So one of the things that the animatic really helped us figure out was something that I don't think we had done before, where we changed the season. As you see, it goes from winter to summer to winter again. And we were struggling with whether we could do that, whether we could show 3 seasons, or if it would be disconcerting. The animatic really proved, I think, to us that we could do that, so that's what we ended up sticking with. Yes?
The music was great. I imagine that it was original music, or
It actually wasn't. It was stock music. Most of
and
the music we used.
at what point of the editing do you choose the music? Because it was perfect with the editing. It seems that the music was first and then the edit followed the music, or it was like a back and forth?
So, yeah, it sometimes works like that. When we find a really strong piece of music,
Yeah.
sometimes it will influence how the cameras turn out. I think in this case, this client in particular really likes this sort of epic music. So we knew going in what it was going to sound like and what the shots were going to look like. But yeah, that's a huge part of why we do the animatics, just to make sure that the music works.
Yeah, great.
So to get on to the next point, we're talking about why animatics are important. We actually already did talk about why they're important, and then we showed that. The next point is to establish pacing, which again should be kind of a given. We need to make sure that the timing is working, and that once we get our CG cameras in there and any other assets that we call together, that it makes sense as a cohesive piece. I mean, you can't just make all 10-second or 20-second cameras and just slap them end to end and expect it to be this dynamic thing. We get to go in here and really drill down on what works to a preliminary music track. Usually we probably audition a couple at that point, and sticks eventually.
This was a project for the World Fair in Kazakhstan, so we just knew going into it that everything needed to be epic and larger than life, and that established the pacing for the edit and the music. And like Dave's saying, the animatic helped us figure that out.
Right, yeah, and just again, to just make sure that we detect any problems ahead of time. Like that's why these are so important, is that if we can find problem points and then get to that point early on in production instead of way later, hopefully. So next point would be, these are templates for future shots. So the visuals are typically very rough, and we'll grab anything at our disposal. It could be quick thumbnail sketches. It could be watermarked iStock clips, preview cameras from Max, whatever, a picture of your dog. I don't know, like if that somehow made sense to go in the animatic. But
We've done that.
Yeah. We might do a few keyframes to imply like a push-in or a tracking move or a rotation around an aerial, just to, again, give the general sense of what's going to be coming.
Yeah, it's much more effective for digital artists to give me a really rough shot, before they render the whole thing, figure out what the timing is going to be, so that then we can go in and render out correctly and use less frames.
So, generate rough shot length. This is, again, very similar to what we were talking about already, but we'll have like a shot list a lot of times, and we'll have creative direction. So we just want to lay down all the assets in the timeline to the music bed and just make sure that it meets even like the specific stuff that's been outlined by the client or that we've agreed on for like in the contract. We're not really worried at this stage about speeding up or slowing down clips. Something you would never do in a final. I mean, you'll look through, and if we got something looks like it's just frame blending and all sorts of terrible, it gets the point across early on, but we'll use that information that'll go back into the production process, and we'll make sure the digital artists all get the right amount of frames out, or that we shoot the appropriate amount of B-roll or whatever.
Show 2:30?
Yeah, well, we're gonna now show another animatic and final movie pairing. This is less on the ArcViz side and more on the information side for a property in New York City.
This one helped influence a B-roll shoot as well, and time lapse, or was there time lapse? I think so. We'll see. So very rough.
That's all it needed to be. And we will show the final.
So as you may have noticed, the music changed. They don't always like the music when we give them the animatic. It was a little too dark at the beginning, but we got to keep the mood and the vibe, which was that sort of Gotham City vibe throughout the whole thing. One of the reasons this animatic was really helpful for us was when we were doing it, the shot list called for 2 actors, and I really like using actors in the edits, even though Rodrigo doesn't always let me. And I managed to get 1 more person in there. So I proved to him that it was beneficial to have a 3rd person, a 3rd character, and we got to keep that person.
So go back in here. So again, experimenting with shot order. So this is once we've already got, we have even if we have a shot list, we are free to move things around as we see fit. If some things were always planned to be one after another, and we thought it was like there's no possible way you would change that, there are often times we go back in and we're like, no, that doesn't really work there. So it's just, again, another proving ground, another way to just have another check before we get too deep into things. And that's the beauty. We can basically do it in real time, without any real hit on other production processes.
Yeah, and as I'm sure you know, if you've done any editing, and what I'll be showing later in my editing section is that just changing a couple shots around can tell a completely different story. So that's our way to do it, cheap and easy and free.
And going back to the sort of music comment that you had earlier, this is where we would establish initial music bed selects, or if the project calls for it, record like a scratch track VO to make sure that we're, getting our pacing and timing down. And we'll actually, I end up doing a lot of our scratch track VOs here, so my voice is all over the place. But we could open up the South Street Seaport.
Sure. Just really quickly to show how that works. It's a lot cheaper to have Dave do it and make all the rewrites before we have the actual talent do it.
Yeah, that's nice, huh?
Seaports have traditionally been our connection to the world. We're going to infuse that history and that legacy into the South Street Seaport. Bustling, eclectic, magnetic, Pier 17 is the embodiment of the seaport's mercantile history.
So there's a lot of space in between here, but just to point this out, we were like, I'm reading the parts of what were originally planned to be interviews. So again, just to get anything in there so we can kind of tell what it would be like if a human was saying it, and just having a little conversation with someone else. So it's a very useful tool early on.
It's also a big part of selecting music, because you can't just pick any song to work with VO.
So I'm going to probably just stop this one because. There you go.
So does anyone have any questions about doing an animatic edit? Nope. Cool.
Anything else you wanted to? Yep. Yeah, I think that's about it from us. We'll be seeing you guys a little bit later on too to talk a little bit more about live action filming and editing and some green screen techniques and whatnot. So yeah, you won't get rid of us too soon.
Thanks, guys.